There comes a moment in every person's life when the mask cracks. When the illusion you've built around your daily routines, the excuses, the distractions, the lies you whisper to yourself in the dark, starts to rot from the inside. For me, that moment came not with a loud crash, but with a quiet realization that I had become someone I no longer respected. I didn't need a therapist to diagnose me. I didn't need a mentor to point it out. The mirror was enough. The reflection staring back at me looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from years of self-betrayal. My eyes, once ambitious, had dulled from dopamine fatigue. My mind, once sharp and curious, now danced like a moth around instant gratification. My soul, once ablaze with dreams, flickered like a dying candle. The worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Because I knew what I was doing. I knew the damage I was causing to my own potential. Every time I reached for my phone before I reached for my purpose, I knew. Every time I binged on junk food and told myself I'd start eating clean tomorrow, I knew. Every time I skipped a workout, scrolled endlessly, dodged deep work, postponed personal goals, and substituted meaning for comfort, I knew. I had become addicted to my own sabotage. It didn't happen overnight. Bad habits are clever like that. They don't knock down your door. They sneak in quietly, wearing the costume of stress relief, entertainment, or self-care. One late night becomes two. One skipped task becomes a trend. One compromise becomes your new standard. And slowly you become less of who you were meant to be, more of who the world conditioned you to settle for. My transformation didn't begin with motivation. It began with grief. Real, raw grief for the version of myself I had buried under years of laziness, fear, and emotional numbing. I mourned the discipline I once had. I mourned the energy I used to wake up with. I mourned the sharpness of thought I used to flex like a blade. But grief is not just sadness. It's a form of clarity. It shows you what mattered most, and what was lost through your own choices. I remember the exact night I broke. I was lying in bed, the room dark except for the cold glow of my screen. Another 3-hour YouTube binge. Another fast food wrapper on the table. Another unread book on the shelf. Another promise to myself broken. It hit me, not like a truck, but like silence. The silence of wasted time. The silence of potential left untouched. I sat up, turned off the screen, and just sat there in the dark. No music. No scrolling. Just me and the weight of my reality. That silence did something. It scared me, but it also sobered me. Because in that stillness, I saw the contrast between who I was and who I could be. Between the life I was tolerating and the life I secretly craved. And for the first time in years, I didn't try to escape the feeling. I let it hurt. I let it burn through me like wildfire, because deep down I knew something had to die for something better to live. I made a vow that night. Not a motivational promise. Not a New Year's resolution. A vow. The kind of vow you don't speak out loud because words can be weak. I made it in my bones. I said to myself, if I keep living like this, I will die with regret. And I meant it. That was the night I chose war. Not with the world. Not with society. With myself. The old version of me, the lazy one, the distracted one, the excuse-making one, had to go. And the only way to kill him was through consistent action. But here's the twist most people don't understand about changing your life. You don't rise in a blaze of glory. You crawl. You stumble. You relapse. You fail. And then you show up again. I didn't wake up the next morning with a six-pack and a millionaire mindset. I woke up groggy, tempted, and doubtful. But I woke up with a vow. And that was enough to begin. The first thing I did wasn't drastic. I deleted every social media app from my phone. Not because social media is evil, but because I was too weak to control it. I had to admit that. The dopamine trap was stronger than my willpower, and pretending otherwise was arrogance disguised as hope. If I wanted to rebuild my discipline, I had to treat my mind like a battlefield, and eliminate anything that kept me comfortable in mediocrity. Next, I forced myself into discomfort. Not dramatic discomfort, small, intentional friction. I woke up an hour earlier than usual and sat in silence for 10 minutes. Just breathing. No phone. No stimulation. Just me and my thoughts. It was terrifying. You'd be surprised how many people fear their own thoughts more than failure. But that silence taught me something. If you can sit with yourself and not run, you're stronger than 90% of people already. I started tracking my habits like a scientist tracks data. I printed a giant calendar and stuck it on my wall. Every day I worked out, read a book, meditated, or wrote, I drew a big red X. And every time I broke a streak, I forced myself to write down why. Not just the surface reason. I was tired. Or I was busy. But the emotional trigger behind it. Was I avoiding pain? Was I afraid of progress? Was I seeking a quick hit of pleasure to distract me from something deeper? This self-analysis became my weapon. I wasn't just trying to build better habits. I was trying to understand the architecture of my mind. I realized that every bad habit I had was not a flaw. It was a coping mechanism. My procrastination was rooted in fear of failure. My social media addiction was rooted in a craving for validation. My overeating was rooted in emotional avoidance. And unless I faced the root, the weeds would keep growing. There were nights I failed. Of course there were. I'd relapse into old patterns. I'd stay up late watching nonsense. I'd skip workouts. But the difference now was that I didn't let failure turn into identity. I stopped saying things like, I'm lazy, or I'm undisciplined. I started saying, I made a weak decision today. That's not who I am, but it's what I did. Let's fix it. This reframe changed everything. Because your language shapes your behavior more than you realize. I also started building a system around my habits. Not motivation. Systems. Motivation is emotional. Systems are structural. I automated the hard parts. I laid out workout clothes the night before. I prepped my meals. I put my phone in another room when I worked. I made a rule, no phone until after 2 hours of deep work. At first I failed. But eventually it became ritual. And once it becomes ritual, it becomes part of your identity. You want to know the biggest change I made? I stopped caring about short-term results. I stopped stepping on the scale. I stopped counting followers. I stopped checking how many days I had meditated. I focused only on showing up. Every day, no matter what. Discipline, not dopamine. Progress, not perfection. And slowly, very slowly, I started to notice changes. My mind became sharper. My body got stronger. My time felt richer. I started sleeping better. Conversations became deeper. Work became more meaningful. And most importantly, I began to trust myself again. That's the real reward of overcoming bad habits. Not the body, not the money, not the applause. It's the quiet, powerful confidence that comes from knowing you do what you say you will do. That's the foundation I built everything on. Not hype. Not hustle. Not hacks. Just honest, brutal self-discipline. The kind that grows in silence. The kind that thrives without validation. The kind that no one can take from you. And that was only the beginning. Part 2. The enemy within changing your life isn't a battle against the world. It's a war against yourself. That was the hardest truth I had to swallow. Every time I blamed circumstances, other people, bad luck, or even my past, I was giving away my power. And I had done that for far too long. I'd given control to the algorithm, to the fridge, to the clock, to moods, cravings, urges. I was living in reaction, not creation. Life was happening to me, not because of me. And every time I told myself I didn't have time, or I wasn't ready, or that I deserved a break, I was feeding the enemy within. That enemy didn't wear a mask. It wore my face. It sounded like my voice. It knew every excuse that could buy just enough comfort to keep me stuck. It didn't scream. It whispered. It whispered things like, "Just one more episode," or "You'll start Monday," or "You've been working hard, you deserve this." That inner voice knew how to mimic self-care while seducing me into self-destruction. And the scariest part was, I had listened to it for years. It had built my lifestyle, one small compromise at a time. And it nearly buried my future. When I started taking my transformation seriously, I knew I couldn't just build new habits. I had to declare war on that voice. But not with hate, with exposure. I started writing down every lie it told me. Every mental loophole. Every delayed decision. Every seductive rationalization. I tracked it like an investigator follows a suspect. I called it out in my journal every morning. I stopped pretending that future me was going to be some magical version of myself. I realized that the only difference between present me and future me was the decision I made today. Right now. In this moment. But the mind is a tricky battlefield. It doesn't like to be reprogrammed. It resists. And every day felt like I was dragging a tired soldier through enemy lines. There were mornings I would wake up and feel like I was being pulled backward by invisible chains. My body wanted comfort. My brain craved novelty. My emotions begged for ease. And I had to choose pain. Choose growth. Choose silence over stimulation, progress over pleasure, integrity over impulse. I learned a strange thing about discipline. It doesn't feel good at first. In fact, it feels terrible. People glorify self-control like it's this noble, peaceful experience. It's not. It's a gritty, nauseating, exhausting process of denying your lower self repeatedly until your higher self becomes the dominant voice. And that process isn't glamorous. It's painful. But it's the pain that purifies you. Every time you resist the impulse to quit, to distract, to indulge, you earn back a piece of your soul. You gain respect for yourself in inches, not miles. There was a period where I became obsessed with understanding my triggers. I treated myself like a case study. I noticed that I craved junk food most after social rejection. I noticed that I binge-watched nonsense when I avoided uncomfortable tasks. I noticed that I scrolled more when I felt anxious or uncertain. These weren't random habits. They were emotional escape hatches. So I stopped asking, "Why am I so lazy?" and started asking, "What pain am I running from right now?" That shift cracked open the prison I had locked myself in. Most people never overcome their bad habits because they think the problem is willpower. It's not. Willpower is a short-term tool. You can't rely on it every day. What you need is self-awareness. You need to become fluent in your own psychology. The more I studied myself, the more I realized I wasn't addicted to bad habits. I was addicted to avoiding discomfort. Every negative pattern was a shield from feeling something real: shame, fear, boredom, inadequacy. And once I learned to face those emotions head-on, their power dissolved. The desire to escape them faded. And so did the habits attached to them. I also became radically honest about who I surrounded myself with. You can't kill bad habits if you live in an environment that feeds them. I started distancing myself from people who glorified procrastination, laziness, and mediocrity. Not out of hate, but out of survival. If you surround yourself with people who numb themselves all day, who mock ambition, who brag about doing nothing, you will become one of them. And no amount of motivation videos will save you. So I went into isolation. Not to hide, but to rebuild. In that silence, I crafted rituals that would rewire my identity. I built a sacred morning routine. Not because it was trendy, but because it gave structure to my chaos. I woke up, made my bed, drank water, wrote down 3 wins from the previous day, and visualized who I was becoming. Not just what I wanted to achieve, but how I wanted to feel about myself. I didn't say, "I want to be successful." I said, "I want to look in the mirror and know I didn't waste my potential today." That single thought anchored me more than any motivational quote ever could. But here's something most people won't admit: breaking bad habits is lonely. Not in a sad way, in a sacred way. You outgrow people. You disconnect from trends. You stop chasing validation. You spend more time with books, silence, breath work, and cold showers than you do with people who once defined your social life. And at first, it feels like loss. But over time, it feels like freedom. Because you're no longer outsourcing your energy. You're reclaiming it. That solitude became my furnace. It burned off the dead weight I had carried for years. I also stopped chasing balance. That word is overrated. What I needed wasn't balance, it was obsession. For a while, I became obsessed with self-mastery. Not to impress anyone. Not to prove a point. But because I had seen what mediocrity did to my soul, and I refused to return to that graveyard. I turned my life into a system of rituals, rules, and reinforcements. I kept a pain journal, where I wrote down everything I felt when I gave into a bad habit. The guilt. The anger. The self-disgust. Not to shame myself, but to create memory. Emotional memory is a powerful teacher. And when I felt tempted again, I'd read that page, and I'd remember how much it cost me. And when I say obsession, I mean it. I had sticky notes all over my walls with reminders. Comfort is a cage. You are stronger than your cravings. Action creates identity. These weren't slogans, they were lifelines. In moments of weakness, they reminded me that every choice was a vote for the kind of man I was becoming. I redefined success. Not as money or aesthetics or followers, but as the number of days I followed through on what I said I would do. That became my scoreboard. That became my currency. I stopped measuring results and started measuring alignment. Did I act in alignment with my highest self today? If yes, I won. If not, I had work to do. That metric changed everything. The irony? Once I stopped chasing external validation, it came anyway. People noticed. My energy shifted. My conversations changed. My work improved. My relationships deepened. And the same people who used to mock my new habits now asked me for advice. But I didn't change to impress them. I changed because I could no longer stand being my own worst enemy. I realized something profound. The only way to thrive is to make your inner world stronger than the outer one. You have to become unshakable internally before anything external can truly elevate you. That's why most people fail. They want results before they build resilience. They want rewards without rituals. They want change without cost. But it doesn't work that way. You have to pay in silence, in effort, in sacrifice. And when you do, life opens up in ways you never imagined. I am not who I was. And I'm not who I'm going to be. I'm just someone who finally got tired of his own lies, and decided to rewrite the script. One brutal, beautiful, deliberate decision at a time. Part 3. Rewiring the machine. The mind is not a fixed structure. It's a programmable machine. And for years I had programmed mine to fail. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but consistently. Every time I chose comfort over growth, my brain recorded it. Every time I reached for my phone instead of my journal, dopamine pathways deepened. Every skipped workout, every snoozed alarm, every emotional reaction to stress, it all became code-etched into my neural architecture. I wasn't lazy by nature. I was conditioned by repetition. And once I saw that, I stopped hating myself and started hacking myself. The key to overcoming bad habits wasn't more discipline, it was better design. I started thinking like an engineer. If my habits were algorithms, then I needed to rewrite the code. I needed to hijack my defaults and reverse the autopilot settings that had kept me mediocre. The brain craves patterns, so I stopped trying to rely on motivation and began manipulating the inputs. I studied behavioral psychology, neuroplasticity, habit stacking, cognitive reframing, not from a place of curiosity, but from necessity. I wasn't just trying to improve. I was trying to rebuild. One of the most powerful shifts I made was changing how I defined identity. Most people believe they need to become someone else. That's a lie. You don't become someone else, you return to who you were before the world made you forget. You strip away the addictions, the trauma responses, the bad programming. You don't evolve into a superhero. You remember that you were never supposed to be average. The real you, the disciplined you, the focused you, the strong you, is buried under years of societal noise and self-abandonment. And your job isn't to find him. It's to remove everything that isn't him. I realized my brain was addicted to immediacy. Like a malfunctioning app, it prioritized short-term pleasure over long-term peace. And so I began starving the algorithm. I created delays between desire and action. I set rules. When I wanted to binge, I had to wait 15 minutes. When I wanted to check my phone, I had to write down why. When I wanted to skip a workout, I had to do 10 push-ups first. These small gaps rewired the reward loop. I stopped feeding the beast on command. I taught my brain that it wasn't in charge of me. I was in charge of it. Environment was another code I rewrote. You can't break bad habits in the same space where they were born. I redesigned my physical world to eliminate friction for good decisions. I placed books on my pillow. I put my workout mat in the middle of the room. I kept my phone in a locked drawer during work hours. I deleted every app that didn't contribute to my vision. I rearranged furniture to support morning routines. I treated my room like a cockpit, not a comfort zone. Everything in it had to serve a function. Clarity, not chaos. But rewiring also meant facing emotional wounds. Because let's be honest, bad habits aren't just habits. They're painkillers. I had to look at the parts of me I ignored. The childhood insecurities. The fear of rejection. The shame of failure. The grief I never processed. The anger I numbed with snacks and screens. I didn't want to meditate. I didn't want to journal. I didn't want to sit with my breath and listen to the echoes of my inner world. But I did. And it sucked. But it saved me. Every morning, I did breath work. Not because I was spiritual, but because my nervous system was hijacked. I was living in a low-grade panic, and no amount of to-do lists could fix it. I had to calm the machine before I could optimize it. Through breath, I learned control. Through silence, I heard truth. Through discomfort, I met resilience. These weren't hacks. They were resurrection rituals. They weren't pretty. But they were permanent. I also became ruthless with my time. I started tracking every hour of my day. I treated it like money. If someone asked for my attention, I charged them mentally. Is this worth $100 of my time? No? Then I don't give it. I cut out conversations that didn't nourish me. I unsubscribed from every notification. I built a weekly schedule that prioritized alignment, not achievement. Time is not just money. Time is proof of what you worship. And my old calendar showed I worshiped distractions. That was no longer acceptable. One of the most transformative techniques I used was mental rehearsal. Every night before bed, I visualized tomorrow. Not in vague terms. I imagined waking up, resisting the urge to scroll, walking into the cold shower, opening my laptop, and diving into deep work. I rehearsed discomfort until it became familiar. Athletes do this before a big game. Surgeons do it before complex procedures. Why don't we do it for our lives? I did. And it changed everything. There were setbacks, of course. There were days I failed the script. But unlike before, I didn't shame myself. I documented it. I studied it. I tracked it like a software bug. Why did I break the pattern today? What was the emotional trigger? What environmental factor influenced me? I learned from it. I improved the code. And I moved forward. Self-compassion wasn't softness. It was system correction. You don't fire your inner programmer for one bad line. You debug and keep building. Another powerful strategy was reducing choice. I simplified my life. Same breakfast every day. Fixed workout schedule. Single set of clothes for work. One task per time block. Decision fatigue is the enemy of progress. The more options you have, the less power you possess. Simplicity became my superpower. Not because I'm boring, but because I'm tired of wasting bandwidth on meaningless decisions. That energy now fuels my mission. I became hyper-aware of triggers. For every bad habit, there's a cue. A location, an emotion, a sound, a scent, a posture. I tracked mine. I built a trigger map. Crave sugar after arguments. Scroll when sitting on couch. Avoid work after meetings. And then I disrupted them. I changed my context. I altered my posture. I created friction between trigger and response. Eventually, the neural pathways weakened. The cravings became faint whispers. And then they died. I built systems, not goals. Goals are great, but they're outcomes. Systems are processes. I stopped saying, I want to lose 10 pounds. I said, I'm someone who trains every day. I stopped saying, I want to be focused. I said, I'm someone who starts deep work at 6 a.m. with no distractions. Identity-based systems became my fuel. Because once your actions align with who you believe you are, consistency becomes automatic. I also created a scoreboard. Not public. Private. A whiteboard with 5 metrics: wake up time, workout completion, focused work hours, distractions logged, and nighttime rituals. Every day I scored myself. I didn't punish failure. I just collected data. And slowly, I optimized the machine. The numbers became my reflection. Not to impress, but to improve. I stopped calling myself a person with bad habits. I started saying, I'm a high-performance human executing a flawed codebase. That shift in language made me an architect, not a victim. I wasn't broken. I was in beta. And every habit was a feature that could be redesigned. In this process, I didn't just stop bad habits, I created a lifestyle incompatible with them. That's the real hack. You don't fight the old you build a life where he doesn't survive. He can't thrive in your new systems. He doesn't fit in your new identity. He suffocates from your new rituals. And eventually he dies. Not with drama. With silence. And in that silence, the real me emerged. Focused. Sharp. Purposeful. Not perfect, but evolving. Not finished, but rising. One neural circuit at a time. Part 4. The breaking point was beautiful. There is a strange beauty in breaking. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind you see in movies with shouting and tears. No, real breaking is silent. It's quiet. It's when your old self reaches its expiration date, and the only thing left is a choice. Not a loud, powerful, inspiring choice. But a quiet one. The kind you make when no one is watching. When you're staring at your ceiling at 2 a.m. wondering how your life became so far from what you dreamed. That's when the real decision happens. That's when the old patterns start to rot, and the new path begins to grow through the cracks. That night I broke again. I had already made promises to myself. I had already tracked habits. I had already felt motivated. But relapse has a way of dragging you back into your shame like it never left. I had just wasted 4 hours, eaten garbage, ignored my work, and numbed my brain with meaninglessness. Again. That kind of failure hurts differently when you know better. And as I sat in that darkness, it hit me, this wasn't about willpower anymore. This was about identity. I kept asking, why do I do this to myself? And the answer came back, over and over again, with brutal simplicity. Because you haven't killed the version of you who needs it. That version of me, the one who sought distraction every time pain showed up, who ran from silence, who needed validation to feel alive, that version wasn't going to disappear through motivation. He had to die. Not with one big action, but with 1,000 daily executions. Every time I chose discipline over impulse, I wasn't just building strength. I was burying a ghost. That was the real war. Not the habits themselves. The identity they were chained to. I realized I had built an entire personality around low standards. Around comfort. Around being the guy who always tries but never changes. It was familiar. It was safe. But it was also killing me. Not in a dramatic way. In a slow, decaying kind of way, the way mold kills a house. Quiet. Persistent. Unseen from the outside. I had to gut the house. Rip out the walls. Burn the blueprint. I started confronting the parts of me I never wanted to look at. The unhealed wounds. The hidden anger. The addiction to chaos. I didn't need more tools, I needed more truth. I wrote letters to my old self. I journaled every regret, every self-betrayal, every time I had lied to myself in the name of later. I wrote pages and pages of everything I was tired of tolerating. It was ugly. It was raw. But it was mine. And when I read it back, I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. For the first time, I saw myself clearly. That clarity birthed something dangerous, resolve. Not the shallow kind. The kind that grows in bone marrow. The kind you feel in your fists when you wake up. I stopped asking for easier paths. I started training for the hard ones. I welcomed resistance. I programmed my mind to see temptation as training. Every time I wanted to scroll, I said, "Good. More mental reps." Every time I felt the urge to quit, I said, "Perfect. This is the rep that builds character." I reframed failure as fuel. I turned discomfort into data. I weaponized pain. And that mindset changed everything. I began viewing my life like a battlefield. Not in a toxic way, in a tactical way. I studied myself like a general studies the enemy. I learned where I was weak. I found the choke points. I reinforced the cracks. I set traps for my impulses. I made my bad habits inconvenient. I turned my home into a performance temple. My desk was clean. My environment was intentional. My meals were prepped. My phone was banished during deep work. I didn't wait to feel ready. I built systems that made success inevitable. I made pain my partner. Most people run from it. I learned to shake its hand. I understood the biological mechanics of discipline. Dopamine is not evil. It's neutral. The problem isn't the chemical, it's the way we misuse it. Every time I resisted the instant hit, I strengthened my prefrontal cortex. I was literally remapping my brain. Neurons that used to scream for sugar now whispered about strategy. It wasn't a mindset hack. It was biological warfare, and I was winning. But here's what no one tells you: thriving after bad habits isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. I still fell. I still stumbled. But the difference was, I got up faster. I didn't dwell. I didn't spiral. I observed. I adjusted. I returned to my rituals. My routines were no longer chores, they were anchors. My mornings were sacred. My evenings were structured. I kept my nervous system calm. I honored my boundaries like they were laws. I created a rhythm. And that rhythm drowned out the noise. I embraced the boring. This was a turning point most people never reach. They quit because progress is boring. Growth is repetitive. But I leaned into it. I realized the truly elite aren't chasing excitement, they're addicted to execution. I stopped needing novelty. I stopped craving change. I became the type of person who found joy in mastery. And that's when the transformation accelerated. People started noticing. They called it discipline. I called it deliverance. I wasn't just changing habits, I was changing fate. My mind became sharper. My choices became cleaner. My energy became magnetic. And all of it came from consistency. From rituals. From a sacred relationship with self-trust. Let me say this clearly, the greatest flex isn't success, it's self-respect. When you know you can trust your own word, you walk differently. You speak less. You move with quiet power. And that's where I was heading. Not towards some aesthetic version of success, but toward wholeness, alignment, internal congruence. And when you live there, you don't chase anything anymore. You attract it. You become it. You live it. The breaking point wasn't the end. It was the door. And I walked through it, one brutal, beautiful, relentless step at a time. Part 5. From reactor to ruler. Most people live like reactors. They wait for life to hand them circumstances and then decide how to feel, how to act, who to be. I lived like that for years. Always responding. Always explaining. Always caught in the trap of external control. If the day was good, I felt good. If someone complimented me, I felt confident. If I failed, I collapsed. I was at the mercy of outcomes, other people's energy, distractions, and moods. And I didn't even know it. That's the curse of reactivity. You don't see it while you're in it. You call it normal. You call it life. But it's a prison. And I was its most loyal inmate. Everything changed when I decided to stop reacting and start ruling. Not ruling others, ruling myself. That single shift changed the entire architecture of my reality. I started waking up and asking, what kind of emotional tone will I lead with today? Instead of, what do I feel like? I stopped waiting for clarity. I generated it. I didn't ask, am I motivated? I asked, what needs to be done regardless of how I feel? I became my own commander. Cold. Clear. Relentless. And for the first time, my mind began to follow. It stopped treating my emotions like law. It started obeying my decisions. That's when I discovered the truth. Emotions are information, not instructions. For years I treated my feelings like commands. I feel tired, so I must rest. I feel scared, so I must wait. I feel unworthy, so I must retreat. No more. I started analyzing emotions like signals. If I felt resistance, I moved toward it. If I felt fear, I studied it. If I felt doubt, I answered it with proof. I became emotionally sovereign. I stopped reacting to feelings and started architecting responses. That shift made me untouchable. I took control of my rituals, my rhythms, my rules. Every morning became sacred. No phone, no stimulation, just breath, reflection, and direction. I started each day with a command. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what matters. I repeated it until my neurons believed it. I didn't negotiate with laziness. I didn't debate with doubt. I spoke identity into my nervous system and watched it obey. There is something divine about speaking power into your day before the world gets a chance to infect it. Midday, I checked in, not with tasks, but with alignment. Am I being who I said I'd be? If not, I adjusted immediately. I didn't wait for the week to end. I didn't need a new planner. I just recalibrated. Self-leadership became my dominant mode of living. I wasn't perfect. I still failed. But I failed forward. Fast, focused, without excuses. I stopped apologizing for my standards. I stopped hiding from my truth. I started living like a sovereign being, not a stimulus-driven creature. Evenings were no longer a time to escape. They were a time to integrate. I reviewed the day like an architect inspects a building. Where was I excellent? Where did I collapse? What belief system showed up in my behavior today? I journaled relentlessly. I interrogated my thought loops. I dismantled inherited mental scripts. I deleted the inner voices that weren't mine, voices from childhood, culture, trauma, and old identities. I started building my mind the same way you'd build a fortress, brick by brick, intentionally, with no room for weakness. And then came silence. The real silence. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. That's where I met my mind face to face. No screens, no dopamine, no noise to protect me. Just presence. And it was terrifying. Because when you remove the distractions, all you're left with is the truth. And the truth, for most people, is a confrontation they postponed their entire life. But I faced it. And through that fire, I forged clarity. Stillness became my training ground. I stopped filling the silence. I started listening to it. That silence gave birth to sovereignty. I stopped reacting to social media. I stopped caring about likes, followers, or anyone else's validation. I stopped needing the world to clap for me. I became self-sourced. My energy came from within. My standards came from conviction, not consensus. My goals were mine. My habits were non-negotiable. I didn't need external pressure. I created internal momentum. My mind became my kingdom. And I ruled it like it mattered. I stopped saying, I hope. I started saying, I decide. Language is leadership. Every word you speak wires your brain. Every sentence you repeat becomes identity. I deleted passive language from my vocabulary. No more. I'll try, I'm trying, I'm working on it. I replaced it with absolutes. I will. I do. This is who I am. Even when I wasn't there yet, I spoke it into existence. Not to lie, but to lead. Because you don't become disciplined by describing your past. You become it by declaring your future and living like it's true. I studied how elite minds operate. Navy SEALs, CEOs, visionaries, fighters, monks. They all had one thing in common: they don't wait for ideal conditions. They create conditions. They don't trust moods. They trust protocol. They don't allow failure to define them. They use it as a forge. And they all speak one language, the language of mastery. Not perfection. Mastery. The pursuit of control over self. The endless refinement of process. The commitment to becoming someone most people don't even believe is possible. That became my blueprint. And then I made a vow. Never again will I be ruled by an emotion that doesn't serve me. Never again will I let a bad mood hijack a good mission. Never again will I let fear steal my future. I may feel it, but I won't follow it. That vow became my compass. And every day, I reinforced it through behavior. Habits weren't just systems, they were sacred oaths. Every time I followed through, I cast a vote for my sovereignty. Every cold shower, every 4:30 a.m. alarm, every deep work sprint, I wasn't just doing tasks. I was training the king inside me. And that king does not bow to cravings. He does not run from discomfort. He does not need applause. He moves with vision. He builds with purpose. He rules with clarity. That's who I became. Not by accident. Not by luck. But by design. I stopped reacting to life. And I started ruling it. Part 6. Momentum over motivation. There comes a point in the transformation journey where you realize motivation is no longer the answer, it's the trap. The highs don't last. The quotes wear off. The playlists go silent. And if your discipline is tied to motivation, you'll fail every time life hits you sideways. That was my mistake for years. I waited for the fire. I chased the hype. I begged for that rush of energy to push me forward. But what I really needed was motion. Not explosive motion, repetitive, consistent, dull motion. The kind that builds unstoppable force while everyone else is still waiting to feel inspired. So I made a shift. I replaced the addiction to motivation with the science of momentum. At first, it was mechanical. I didn't feel like working out, I did it anyway. I didn't feel like waking up early, I got up anyway. No theatrics. No drama. Just execution. It felt soulless at times, robotic even. But slowly, something began to change. I started trusting myself again. Every small win, making the bed, drinking the water, avoiding the scroll, started stacking. My nervous system stopped bracing for failure. My mind stopped doubting my word. And then it happened, I started to crave effort. Effort became identity. When you live without consistency for long enough, your nervous system treats effort like a threat. It resists it. It dreads it. But if you can push past that resistance, just for a few weeks, your entire emotional wiring begins to shift. I started feeling weird when I didn't train. I felt off when I skipped journaling. I felt heavy when I didn't push myself. The discomfort of not doing became louder than the discomfort of doing. That's when I knew I had crossed over. The secret wasn't motivation. It was momentum. Micro wins. Daily. Relentless. No matter what. I created systems that ran on autopilot. Not because I was strong, but because I was tired of relying on willpower. I scheduled everything. My deep work blocks, my breaks, my meals, my sleep, even my reflection time. I used time blocking, task batching, weekly reviews. Not to be efficient, but to be consistent. I wasn't chasing hacks. I was designing a rhythm that couldn't be broken by a bad mood or a busy day. Most people fail not because they're weak, but because they're unstructured. They rely on emotion. I relied on infrastructure. I built my life like a machine, with rituals that triggered action before excuses had time to speak. I applied the 2-minute rule ruthlessly. If a habit took less than 2 minutes to start, I did it instantly. 2 minutes of writing. 2 minutes of stretching. 2 minutes of planning. 2 minutes of breath work. Why? Because activation is everything. Once you start, the resistance dies. It's the start that kills most progress. So I engineered my life to start constantly. I gamified everything. I turned my day into a scoreboard. Green checks for completion. Red for misses. I didn't do it to be perfect. I did it to stay awake. Awareness kills autopilot. When you track, you transform. So I tracked my habits, my mood, my energy levels, my food, my screen time. Not obsessively, but strategically. Every metric became feedback. Every miss became data. Every win became fuel. I stopped saying, I need more discipline. I started asking, how do I reduce resistance? I focused less on grit and more on flow. I optimized my environment, my tools, my schedule to support my best self automatically. If I wanted to meditate, I left my cushion in the middle of the room. If I wanted to write, I opened my laptop to a blank page the night before. If I wanted to eat clean, I removed junk from the house completely. I didn't rely on strength. I relied on strategy. People think thriving means doing more. It doesn't. It means removing friction. It means creating a system where the highest version of you is the default, not the exception. But the most important change was internal. I stopped identifying as someone trying to change. I started identifying as someone who already had. I no longer said, I'm working on it. I said, this is who I am now. And then I acted like it. Not just once, but repeatedly, until it stuck. You become what you repeat. Your nervous system doesn't respond to intention, it responds to frequency. Repeat effort. Repeat follow-through. Repeat strength under pressure. Repeat presence when distracted. That's how you rewire the system. I learned to love the mundane. Because mastery hides in repetition. I did the same habits every day. Meditate, workout, deep work, read, journal, cold shower, track. Over and over. No variation. No novelty. And in that boring routine, I became unstoppable. While others burned out chasing stimulation, I was building a structure that could survive anything. Even chaos. There were days when life collapsed, emergencies, disappointments, betrayal, heartbreak. But my structure held. I didn't break. I flexed. My habits weren't decoration. They were armor. They weren't just for good days. They were for war. And when war came, I was ready. I became calm under pressure. Sharp under stress. Clear under confusion. Because I didn't wait to build habits when things were good. I built them when it was hard. And that made them permanent. The best part? Momentum compounds. You don't just improve. You expand. My health improved. My income improved. My relationships deepened. My creativity exploded. My confidence tripled. And it wasn't because I was lucky. It was because I had momentum. I moved forward, every day. No matter what. No matter how small. And that forward motion changed everything. You don't need motivation to change your life. You need movement. Daily. Relentless. Focused. Boring. Intentional. Momentum is the most powerful drug in the world. And once you taste it, you never go back. Part 7. When habits become who you are, there is a turning point that most people never talk about. It's not the moment when you finally wake up early, or eat clean for a week, or meditate for 30 days straight. Those are milestones, but not the breakthrough. The real breakthrough is when you stop thinking about doing the habit, and you just do it. No friction. No negotiation. No inner debate. It becomes automatic. But even that isn't the true shift. The true transformation is when you don't just do the habit, you become it. That's the point I reached. Slowly. Painfully. Quietly. The rituals, the routines, the discipline, they weren't just external behaviors anymore. They were me. Not what I do, but who I am. And that's when I knew I had escaped the cycle. Not because I was perfect, but because my default settings had changed. I was no longer fighting myself every day. I was flowing with who I had decided to become. At first, it felt strange. To wake up and not feel resistance. To sit down and not procrastinate. To walk past junk food and not flinch. My brain wasn't used to peace. It had been trained in chaos. For years, effort meant pain. Focus meant strain. Consistency felt like climbing a mountain. But now, effort felt natural. Focus felt like home. Consistency felt like breathing. How? I didn't just change habits. I changed identity. That's the core. That's the truth no productivity hack will give you. If you don't rewire your identity, your habits will always be temporary. You'll always bounce back. You will always relapse. Because behavior follows belief. And if you still believe you're the same person underneath the surface, no change will stick. I started reprogramming my internal dialogue. Every morning I asked, "Who am I showing up as today?" And I answered, "I'm the kind of person who executes without excuses. I'm the kind of person who eats clean, trains hard, works deep, and protects their energy. I'm the kind of person who chooses long-term fulfillment over short-term pleasure." I repeated it. Over and over. Until my mind stopped doubting it. Until it became my lens. Until it became my identity. And I didn't just say it. I acted it. Identity is not built by affirmation alone. It's built by aligned action, repeated until it becomes unconscious. I designed everything to reinforce the new me. My environment. My calendar. My conversations. My sleep. My inputs. My boundaries. Every part of my life became a mirror that reflected the identity I was building. I even changed how I spoke to others. I stopped saying, "I'm trying to," or "I'm working on." I started saying, "I don't do that anymore." Simple. Clear. Final. No explanation. Just truth. I wasn't just convincing myself. I was solidifying the message in my subconscious. I also became hyper-selective with my language. No more cheat days. No more slipping up. Just data. Either I was aligned, or I wasn't. No guilt. No shame. Just awareness. That neutrality freed me. Because the moment you label yourself as bad or off track, you reignite the identity of the old self. I wasn't bad, I was learning. I wasn't off track, I was recalibrating. I became my own coach, my own architect, my own inner commander. There's something powerful about designing your own identity. It makes you immune to trends. You no longer need motivation. You no longer look sideways at others. You stop comparing. Because your path is yours. Your standard is sacred. Your process is precise. You're not influenced, you're intentional. That's how I became unshakable. Not loud. Not flashy. Just grounded. People ask, "Don't you ever feel tempted?" Of course. But the difference is, I don't identify with the temptation anymore. I don't see it as a part of me. I see it as a test. A glitch. A shadow of a past life. And I treat it as such. No engagement. No overthinking. Just awareness. And redirection. You see, when you're trapped in bad habits, your mind creates a narrative to justify them. This is just who I am. I've always been like this. I'm wired this way. That story becomes your prison. The only way out is to rewrite the script. Deliberately. Audaciously. Repeatedly. And that's what I did. One habit at a time. One belief at a time. One decision at a time. Eventually, I stopped keeping track of streaks. I didn't need them. The behavior was built. The rhythm was installed. The identity was integrated. I was no longer a person trying to be disciplined. I was a disciplined person. I was no longer a person working on consistency. I was consistent. I didn't need the scoreboard. I was the scoreboard. This isn't to say I never slipped. I did. But when I did, I didn't spiral. I recalibrated. Fast. Without shame. That's what identity gives you, resilience. When you're truly aligned with a new identity, you don't need to defend it. You just return to it. Like gravity. I also learned how to protect my new identity. Ruthlessly. I stopped entertaining conversations that pulled me back. I stopped absorbing content that glorified mediocrity. I stopped apologizing for my boundaries. I was no longer available for energy leaks. No longer available for mental clutter. No longer available for people who wanted the old me back. Because the old me wasn't sleeping. He was gone. And I wasn't going to resurrect him to make others comfortable. The people who truly love your transformation will rise with you. The ones who don't, let them go. Your identity is sacred. Guard it. Every morning, I return to the mirror. Not to judge, but to confirm. You are not who you were. You are who you chose to become. And every time I kept my word to myself, every rep, every task, every small act of alignment, I proved it. This isn't about habits anymore. It's about identity. You don't thrive because you do the right thing once. You thrive because it's who you are now. And nothing, no excuse, no emotion, no old memory, can take that away from you once it's integrated. Habits might change your day. But identity? It changes your life. Part 8. The power of being alone. Most people fear being alone. Not because they dislike silence, but because they're terrified of what it reveals. Without distractions, you hear your thoughts. You feel your regrets. You face your truth. There are no filters in solitude. There is only you, and the echo of your decisions. I used to run from that. I used to fill every gap in my day with noise, messages, music, Netflix, endless scrolling. Not because I needed stimulation, but because I feared introspection. I feared the confrontation that stillness demanded. But when I began the journey to kill my bad habits and rise, I understood something that changed my life. If I didn't become comfortable alone, I would never become powerful in public. So I stopped running from myself. I turned off the noise. I cleared my calendar. I deleted the apps. And I entered solitude, not as a punishment, but as a path. At first, the silence was deafening. Without the dopamine hits of modern life, my brain rebelled. My thoughts grew louder. My anxiety surged. Every itch for stimulation felt like withdrawal. But I stayed with it. I didn't flinch. I sat in the discomfort. I faced the demons I had buried under years of distraction. The memories I avoided. The dreams I'd abandoned. The guilt I pretended wasn't there. All of it surfaced. And then something extraordinary happened. In that discomfort, I found clarity. I realized that my worst habits weren't problems, they were escapes. And the only reason I kept returning to them was because I had never given myself space to feel fully. I had numbed everything. My joy. My sadness. My potential. My pain. All of it had been blurred out by consumption. The silence forced me to process. And in that processing I found power. Power in presence. Power in simplicity. Power in the ability to choose my next action without being emotionally hijacked. I created what I called power blocks. 1 hour a day. No sound. No stimulation. No agenda. Just presence. I would sit. Sometimes journal. Sometimes meditate. Sometimes breathe. Sometimes just observe. No multitasking. No productivity. Just being. And it changed everything. In those blocks, I got to know myself. Not the version I had curated for others, but the raw, unfiltered self. The version that didn't care about likes or comparison. The version that remembered what it really wanted from life. That version had clarity. That version wasn't lost. He was buried under years of mental clutter. But in silence he emerged. Strong. Calm. Certain. That's when I realized, most people don't need more motivation. They need more solitude. We live in a world that worships noise. But growth demands quiet. So I redesigned my life to make room for solitude. I took walks without headphones. I ate without screens. I traveled alone. I journaled until my hand ached. I asked myself questions no one else could answer. Who am I without validation? What would I chase if no one was watching? Where am I lying to myself? And I answered them, honestly. In that space, I rebuilt trust. Because trust doesn't come from success. It comes from intimacy with self. The more time I spent alone, the more I respected myself. Not because I was doing something spectacular, but because I was showing up, consistently, without needing external permission or applause. Solitude taught me emotional independence. I stopped outsourcing my happiness to people or outcomes. I became self-sourced. If the world was loud, I remained still. If the world collapsed, I remained focused. If people doubted me, I remained aligned. That stillness became my armor. That silence became my strength. I became the eye of the storm. My energy stopped leaking. My boundaries solidified. My time became sacred. I stopped saying yes to every invite, every distraction, every shallow interaction. I stopped being available to people who only knew the old me. Not because I was better than them, but because I was no longer interested in being dragged back. Solitude gave me standards. I stopped settling for low-quality thoughts. Low-quality people. Low-quality habits. Because when you spend enough time in silence, your inner world becomes rich. And you begin to realize just how poor most external noise really is. I also discovered a new level of focus. Deep, unshakable focus. The kind that makes hours disappear. The kind that brings mastery. I could sit and read for hours. Write without fatigue. Work without checking my phone. Not because I forced myself, but because there was no inner chaos pulling me away. Solitude taught me how to go deep. And in that depth, I found the real edge, longevity. Anyone can be disciplined for a week. But can you build a life around it? Anyone can be focused for an hour. But can you live in flow? Anyone can change habits temporarily. But can you make them part of your soul? That's what solitude gave me, the space to integrate. To embed new behaviors so deeply into my psyche that they became unshakable, even under pressure. I learned that transformation is not just about what you remove. It's about what you sit with. So I sat. With my fears. With my failures. With my greatness. And I emerged not just changed, but complete. Alone, but never lonely. Silent, but never small. Still, but more powerful than I had ever been. Solitude wasn't the detour. It was the way. Part 9. Building a life that cannot break. Discipline is fragile when it depends on how you feel. But when it's built into a system, it becomes something greater. It becomes structure. Indestructible. Predictable. Repeatable. That's what I realized in the middle of my transformation. I couldn't just become better. I had to build better. I had to turn effort into infrastructure. I had to stop improvising success and start engineering it. Most people try to improve by willpower. They wake up and ask, "What should I do today?" That question already invites failure. Because it means your day starts with decision-making, not direction. I eliminated that. I stopped waking up to choose. I started waking up to execute. Everything was already chosen. I built systems so precise they made deviation painful. The system started with structure. Every day had a script. A repeatable protocol. From the time I opened my eyes to the moment I closed them, I knew what needed to happen. Not because I was obsessed with control, but because I was obsessed with freedom. And structure is the ultimate freedom. When you know exactly what to do, you save energy. You eliminate hesitation. You become fluid. Fast. Focused. Mornings were sacred. I didn't check my phone. I didn't engage with noise. I drank water, moved my body, journaled 3 pages, and meditated. Same order. Every day. No room for negotiation. That ritual grounded my nervous system and gave me emotional leverage before the world even woke up. Work blocks came next. Deep work. No distractions. No multitasking. One task. One timer. One mission. I used the Pomodoro technique, 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off. 4 cycles, then a longer break. I wore noise-canceling headphones even when the room was silent. I lit the same candle to trigger my brain into flow. Every session was tracked. Not for productivity, but for presence. My nutrition was automated. I rotated between 3 meals. No decisions. No energy waste. Food was fuel, not entertainment. I meal prepped on Sundays, portioned out every container, and labeled everything. That way, I never had to ask, "What should I eat?" I already knew. And knowing gave me power. Sleep was locked. No screens after 9 p.m. No caffeine after 2 p.m. No exceptions. I used blackout curtains, white noise, and magnesium. I treated sleep like a performance enhancer, because it is. I didn't chase more time in the day. I chased higher quality energy for the time I already had. And that made all the difference. But it wasn't just about habits. It was about architecture. I built weekly systems too. Every Sunday I did a systems check. I reviewed the last 7 days. What worked? What didn't? What friction did I feel? Where did I lose time? What habits held strong? What triggered regressions? I treated myself like a system designer. If something broke, I didn't blame myself. I optimized it. I color-coded my calendar. Green for creative. Blue for administrative. Red for non-negotiables. I stopped letting tasks float. Everything had a home. Everything had a time slot. I lived by the rule: if it's not scheduled, it doesn't exist. That rule alone multiplied my output tenfold. I also built reflection rituals into the week. Friday nights were reserved for deep introspection. No events. No socializing. Just me, my notebook, and silence. I asked big questions. Am I living in alignment? What's draining me? What am I avoiding? Where am I lying to myself? And I answered, brutally honest. That weekly feedback loop was like software updates for my soul. The most important part? I made my environment obey the system. I didn't trust motivation. I trusted proximity. I made temptation hard. I made execution easy. I removed all junk food. I kept my phone in another room. I deleted all entertainment apps. My laptop had a single tab open, my to-do list. My space didn't just support the system, it enforced it. I used tech as a servant, never a master. I used habit tracking apps, time blocking tools, email filters, calendar automations. I turned reminders into rituals. I used NFC tags to trigger routines with a tap. I created shortcuts for everything. The fewer decisions I had to make, the more decisions I could make well. Even relationships became part of the system. I communicated my boundaries. I created focus windows where I wasn't available. I blocked off deep connection hours with the people who mattered. I wasn't just building a productive life. I was building a high-quality one. But here's the secret, it wasn't hard. Not after the first 30 days. Because I wasn't relying on energy. I was relying on systems. I woke up and stepped into a machine that I built for the person I wanted to become. Every action I took was already mapped. I didn't feel like working out. But my shoes were already by the door. My playlist was already queued. My mind had no excuse. The system had already decided. And over time, the system became identity. I no longer said, I need to be disciplined. I said, this is just what I do. I no longer asked, how do I stay on track? I said, there is no off track. There is only refinement. And in that refinement, I reached a level of internal peace that no goal had ever given me. This wasn't about success. This was about sovereignty. About knowing that no matter what chaos erupted around me, I had something inside me that could not break. Because it wasn't powered by motivation. It was powered by design. The system became my superpower. And now? I don't chase change. I embody it. Part 10. The quiet victory. There's no parade when you change your life. No applause. No fireworks. No finish line. Just silence. You wake up one day and realize it worked. You're no longer fighting yourself. You no longer crave the things that once ruled you. You walk past distractions without a second glance. You do hard things without negotiating. You keep promises to yourself without drama. And it's not because you became superhuman. It's because you finally became you, the version that was always buried under noise, addiction, fear, and lies. That's the victory no one sees. The quiet one. The one without fanfare. The one that happens when the war inside your head goes still. This is what I learned on the other side of bad habits. Freedom doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like calm. You don't feel euphoric, you feel clean. Clear. Steady. You trust yourself in a way you never did before. You don't need to shout your transformation from rooftops. You are the transformation. It radiates in how you move, how you think, how you say no, how you say yes. People feel it before you speak it. I used to think success meant doing big things. Now I know it means doing small things with surgical precision, daily, forever. I used to think thriving meant having more. Now I know it means needing less. I used to think the goal was to feel better. Now I know the goal is to be better, regardless of how I feel. And being better is quiet. It's waking up at 5 a.m. when no one is watching. It's doing the work even when it's invisible. It's making the right choice with no reward in sight. It's walking away from easy wins that cost your soul. It's staying grounded when you're praised. It's staying focused when you're ignored. It's staying aligned when you're tempted. That's real strength. Not noise. Not validation. Alignment. I don't measure my growth by what I do anymore. I measure it by what no longer controls me. The food I don't need. The notifications I don't check. The lies I don't believe. The shortcuts I don't take. The old self I don't return to. That's how you know it's real. And I want to be honest with you, it's still hard. There are days I wake up tired. Days I want to coast. Days I'm tempted to slide backward. But now, I have something the old me never had: quiet momentum. A system that doesn't depend on how I feel. An identity that doesn't collapse under pressure. A rhythm that protects me when life goes sideways. Because life will go sideways. You'll get hurt. You'll get distracted. You'll get overwhelmed. The difference now? You're ready for it. You've trained for it. You've become someone who doesn't fall apart when things get hard. You respond. You recalibrate. You return. That's the legacy of discipline. Not perfection. Not a flawless track record. But a habit of returning. Again. And again. And again. Even when it's boring. Even when no one's clapping. Even when no one's watching. Especially then. Because in those moments, you are more than just habits. You are integrity. You are consistency. You are focus. You are patience. You are power. You become the kind of person who wins silently. The kind who doesn't announce the journey, just lives the result. The kind who doesn't demand respect, just earns it. The kind who doesn't fear falling, because he knows he'll rise. And that's what thriving really is. It's not loud. It's not shiny. It's not performative. It's quiet. It's private. It's daily. It's forever. So if you've made it this far, know this: you don't need another hack. You don't need more motivation. You don't need external validation. You already have what it takes. You just need to start building the system, stacking the wins, eliminating the noise, rewriting the story, and becoming the version of you that you were always meant to be. Not just once. Every day. Every choice. Every breath. Quietly. Deliberately. Permanently. You don't have to prove it. You just have to be it. That's how I overcame bad habits and thrived. And that's how you will too.